Now, I don't know about all of you, but I don't often repeat the same project more than once. But there is one project that always seems to come up from time to time. It seems as though about every year or so, I need to make a picture frame. Now, I've built a lot of picture frames over the years, many different sizes, different shapes, different joinery methods, and it always seems that whenever we need a new picture frame, it's never in the size of one that I've already made. So today, we got to make a new picture frame. This time around, we're going to make our frame stock from this rather large and slightly heavy piece of spalted maple. I've never made a spalted maple picture frame. I think it's going to be pretty cool. I'm Jeff. You're watching Home Built Workshop. Now, to make these frames, probably the quickest method would be to just rip off about some 3/4 inch strips. Then I could use the end as basically the front of my frames, but I like the spalting better on this top surface, so I want to use that for the surface of my frames. So I'm going to begin by ripping some 1¼ inch strips of this, then we can resaw that on the bandsaw and basically have a couple of sticks of stock that we can use. If I didn't explain it well, it's going to make sense here pretty quick. After running these through the drum sander to remove the bandsaw marks, stock is squared up to size, ready to move on. Next, I want to cut the groove, which will eventually hold the artwork. Now, there's a couple different ways you could do this. Actually, there's probably more than that, but the main ones that come to mind are using the table saw with the blade raised slightly. You'd make a shallow cut this way, then you'd rotate your piece and make a shallow cut that way, releasing that little waste piece and leaving you with a nice little groove. Now, I don't like using my particular table saw like that just because, I don't know, it's kind of janky. Feels a little unsafe to me. What I want to do is use a straight cutting bit in my router table along with a fence, and then I can make a couple passes, slowly increasing the cut on the router to cut that groove. To me, that works a lot better, only because, like I said, I don't feel comfortable doing a lot of intricate cuts with my particular table saw. If you happen to have a quality table saw, there's no reason not to try cutting it with the table saw. I just don't trust mine for stuff like that. And I think that there's some sort of a side note in there. You need to know the limits of your equipment, what operations work well, what don't, and also know your own personal limits. If you're not comfortable using a machine a certain way, don't do it. Use another method. There's a lot of different ways you can perform basically the same thing. So use the methods that you're comfortable with and that you can operate safely. Don't push your machines outside of their limits. That's where you could get hurt. I know it's not a super close-up, but hopefully here you can sort of see my router table setup. I've got a straight cutting bit in my router, and it's tucked part way into a wooden sacrificial fence on my router table. This will allow me to only cut to the depth to where I set the fence. After routing that channel that'll hold the artwork, I'm going to switch over to a chamfer bit in my router, and I'm going to run a small chamfer around the outside edge as well as the inside edge of the stock. A chamfer is my favorite, just something I like about the chamfer. Of course, if you wanted to do a round over or any other profile really, go ahead and do that, but my favorite is the chamfer, so that's what I'm going to use. I like it. And with that, our stock is about ready to go, except for some final sanding later. We've got the groove cut for the artwork. We've got some decorative chamfers on the outside edges. Now we can focus on cutting our 45-degree miters and actually start forming the frame. And just like with every other project out there, there's more than one way to do this, and not one way is right or wrong. You could use a miter box and cut these by hand with a handsaw. They even make fancy little trimming things. I'm not sure what they're called. Maybe that's the technical term. That are made to shave away the angle so that you get perfect miters. This is more of a specialized tool. But the method that I'm going to use is this picture frame miter sled. I built this sled a few years ago in a YouTube video. I'll put a link down below in the description. But this sled is based on a design by David Picciuto. Now, I've tried several different sleds to cut 45-degree angles, and with mixed success. Some have worked okay, some have really not been great at all, but really out of the ones that I've used, this one works the best. This one's cool because it's got an adjustable stop that registers off the marks from this aluminum framing square. That way you can just slide it to the measurement that you need, lock it down, and start making your cuts. I've already measured my artwork, and the artwork size is 11 by 17. So first we're gonna make one cut on one side, then we'll flip this piece around, adjust our stop, make our second cut, and really just repeat that process until we have all the sizes we need. One of the things that I really like about this particular design is that it's meant to work with the groove for your artwork, because it's really from this groove where you get your actual dimension. You don't measure from the outside, you need to measure from the inside. So this fits over that square. You'll make your cut to start the piece. Then we can set this to our dimension, which will be 17 inches. Lock that down, and then we'll run this over here, make our second cut, and that's going to give us exactly a 17-inch piece. Little bad spot on this one. We'll just skip a little bit past that one and make our cut there. And just like that, there's our pieces for the frame. Another thing that's cool about this particular jig is that since one end does not have the stop block, you make your cut on one side of the blade, then you flip the piece around and make your next cut on the other side of the blade. The beauty of that, in case you're not familiar, is that if when you build your sled, your angle is off a little bit, ideally you'd be cutting at a perfect 45-degree angle, but let's say you're off half a degree or so. Once you make the cut on either side of the blade, it really kind of balances out any inaccuracies in your fence, so you always end up with a perfect 90-degree cut. If one is 44 degrees, the other is going to be 46 degrees, and they cancel out. It's pretty cool. Let's glue this frame up. When I'm gluing up a picture frame, I like to use this strap clamp. It has little brackets that help register the corners and keeps everything nice and square as you tighten up the clamp. It's not something I use all the time, but for frames and stuff like this, it works really well. I'm just cleaning up a little bit of the squeeze out. Right in the corners, that's going to be the hardest to clean up once this glue dries. It's not impossible to clean up later. Just have to get in there with a chisel or something. But if we can avoid some of that, that is what I want to do. All right. We'll just let that dry for a bit. Now, before I apply any finish to this frame, I want to reinforce these joints just a little bit. There's a lot of different ways, again, like everything else, that you can reinforce it. There's little tab things that you can use that you see most likely on commercially made frames. You can put splines in the side. I've done that before. What I'm going to do this time around is just drill a shallow hole the size of this dowel. I'll cut off some little slices of this dowel, glue them in there, and really that's just going to add a little bit more gluing surface just to help reinforce the joint. After trimming the dowels flush using a flush trim saw, it's on to my favorite part of any project. I'm sanding this piece up through the grits, and I'm going to stop at 320 grit. For the finish, I'm just using kind of a quick homebrew wipe-on poly. This is just basically some regular satin polyurethane that I've thinned with a little bit of mineral spirits. That way it wipes on a little bit better. Sometimes right out of the can, it's a little bit too thick to just wipe on, so the mineral spirits thins it out. I'm just going to wipe it on with a rag. In all, I'm going to apply about 3 coats of this finish. I'll wait for the finish to dry, then I'll lightly sand with 400 grit and apply the following coats. That brings out the lines from the spalting. That's cool looking. After letting the finish dry overnight, this frame looks super cool. I love how the finish brought out the markings from the spalted maple. This is going to look awesome. To finish assembling this, all I really need to do is install a hanger. I'm going to use one of these little sawtooth hangers. They come with little nails. You just nail it in place. When I'm installing these little nails, I always use a pair of needle nose pliers, because trying to hold on to that, you will hit your finger, and it does not feel good. Now we can install our glass or acrylic, whatever it is you're using for the front. In this case, it's a piece of glass. And here's a quick tip for you. If you're looking for glass for a particular frame, as long as you're making what I would say is a standard size, and you only need 1 or 2 pieces, just go to the store. Any place that sells frames, buy the cheapest frame you can get. A lot of times it'll have glass or maybe a piece of acrylic on the front. Throw the rest of the frame away and use the glass. That way, it's quick, it's simple, pretty inexpensive, and you don't have to mess with cutting glass or cutting acrylic. Acrylic always smells so bad when you cut it. It works great, but smells terrible. Of course, if you're making a truly custom size frame, then you're gonna have to cut the glass or the acrylic. But in this case, this frame's 11 by 17. I just bought this cheap thing, and I mean cheap. Super cheap. Just because I wanted the backer and the piece of glass. I didn't have to worry about cutting it. Little quick tip for you. Now we can put our artwork in there. In this case, it's a poster from a Lindsey Stirling concert that my daughter went to. Drop that in. And since I bought the frame, I've already got the backer. Now we just need to secure it. Now this particular backer has clips in there that you could use, but those require a slot cut in the side. I'm not going to use those. I've got this pneumatic tool to install the flex points. Those are the little bendy metal tabs that you see on a lot of commercially made frames. It works awesome. You can get manual versions of these as well, but this pneumatic one, I couldn't pass it up. The price was right, and it works awesome. Voila. And there it is. Our spalted maple picture frame is complete. This thing looks so awesome. In fact, I really think that this might be my favorite frame I've ever made. And now I kind of want to remake a whole bunch of them in spalted maple so that they all look this cool. Really happy with the way this turned out. I gotta go give this to my daughter now so she can hang it up in her room. I've got a whole entire playlist of different styles of picture frames. There's a link down in the video description if you want to check that out. This video will be added to that exact same playlist. Hope you found this helpful. Maybe you picked up some tips, tricks, some information. Keep that in mind about buying a cheap frame from the store. Saves you from having to cut the glass. Thanks a lot for watching. We'll see you next time. Man, that's cool looking. Wow.